For a lot of people, it's obvious whether they need to be eating more or be eating less in order to achieve their goal. However, what's not so obvious is what they should be eating. What's the best macronutrient ratio? How much protein do I need? Should I eat high carb or low carb? In this video, I'm going to answer all those questions, but first, we need to understand what each macronutrient actually is. The three macronutrients are protein, fats, and carbohydrates, also known as carbs. Every single food can be broken down into these three umbrella terms. Let's start by talking about the most well-known and arguably the most important macronutrient, protein. Protein does just about a billion things in the body, but what we really care about is muscle protein synthesis. If all you wanted to do was lose weight, eat less than you burn. However, that's going to come at the cost of your body using protein to burn as energy. However, if we eat protein, we stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and that builds new muscle and keeps our muscle around. So, when you eat a high protein diet, you kind of get the best of both worlds, whether you're trying to gain muscle or lose fat. Because if you're gaining muscle, it gives you the building blocks you need to, build muscle. And if you're cutting or if you're losing fat, it allows you to keep the muscle on the bone while you use the fat for energy. Protein is important for everyone every single day. Unlike fat, which can be stored for some relative amount of time, and carbs, which technically aren't even a necessary nutrient at all, protein must be consumed. There are some things known as the essential amino acids that your body just cannot make. You have to get them from food. And your body is very smart. It knows it can't make these essential amino acids, so it drives you to consume them. If you don't consume these essential amino acids, your body is going to keep making you hungry until you consume them. This is why protein, to some degree at least, is certainly really important for staying satiated. So basically, here's what you need to know about protein. It helps stimulate muscle protein synthesis, which builds new muscle and keeps your muscle on the bone. It keeps you satiated to at least some degree by consuming a certain amount of it. And also, it has 4 calories per gram. Next, let's talk about fats. Fats, despite their name, don't actually necessarily make you fat. In fact, like protein, we have to consume them. They're essential for life. Fats help do things in the body like maintain hormonal levels, dissolve fat-soluble vitamins, reduce blood sugar spikes by slowing digestion, and much more. A gram of fat has 9 calories. Finally, let's talk about the third macronutrient, carbs or carbohydrates. As I mentioned before, carbs are technically not necessary for you to eat. They are necessary for life, however. Technically, you could go the rest of your life without eating another carb, and you would in fact survive. And this is because your body is very clever. It has ways of turning other molecules like fats and proteins into glucose, your body's main energy source, through a process called gluconeogenesis. Now, just because carbs are necessary doesn't mean that most people shouldn't be eating them. Things like fruits, vegetables, and whole grains are typically very, very good sources of both fiber and many micronutrients. And really, carbs are the backbone of most athletes' diets. They are really what drives performance a lot of the time. So now we understand what each macronutrient is, but what's the best ratio of them? How much of each should I be eating in a day? Well, the truth is, for the most part, and for most people, it really isn't actually that important. You can get super specific, and you may even get better results being super specific, but I know that I personally have spent a lot of time obsessing over very minor details, trying to hit an arbitrary ratio just because that's optimal. Regardless of which diet you choose, whether it's high carb, low carb, vegan, keto, carnivore, no matter what diet you choose, if you are making progress towards your goal, feeling good day to day, having energy for training, well, it really doesn't matter because you hit those things. There is a lot of theory and emerging evidence of perhaps some diets being better for certain people than others. However, for the most part, we don't have any strong evidence to suggest that one diet for any specific human being is significantly better than another, especially an average person. Don't get me wrong, you can certainly find long trials and experiments in nutrition. However, for the most part, the optimal study where you pretty much would take a whole bunch of pairs of twins and put one of them on one diet and the other one on the other diet, is almost impossible to run because it would take a lifetime. It would be extremely unethical, and we just can't really do that. However, with the metabolic studies we do have, what we know is that pretty much macronutrient content is not the most important factor. Overall calories are very likely more important, both for muscle gain and fat loss. But you have to remember that these studies are done in a metabolic ward. They aren't done in the real world. So even though the metabolic ward studies say it doesn't really matter, that doesn't mean it won't matter to you. For example, some people may feel that going on a keto diet, they just feel amazing and they just find the fat, it just slips right off their body pretty much, and they really don't have a hard time dieting. Maybe there's something you could say about insulin and its role on storing fat, but for the most part, what it boils down to is, the foods you eat in a keto diet are more restrictive. You're eating the same thing over again. You're not as likely to hedonically eat. The foods are also typically full and very filling. So when you actually add up the calories that person is consuming, it tends to line up with the direction they go. So even if a specific diet might work for you, the odds are you really aren't actually that far from the mean. So I would work backwards, starting with minimums, and then fill in the rest from there. And here's why. Remember how I mentioned earlier that protein and fats are necessary nutrients while carbs technically aren't? That's where it comes from. Every single day, you need to eat some protein and some fat, pretty much, for optimal living. There is some new literature suggesting that super high protein may actually be better. However, I think for most people, and what's actually very reasonable for most people, is to be aiming for about 0.7 grams per pound of protein and about 0.3 grams per pound of fat as a minimum every single day. While you certainly can have diet success not eating at any of these thresholds, I think for the majority of people, it is your best bet to eat past these thresholds. And then once you hit those thresholds, you can pretty much fill in the rest of your calories with whatever you want. If you want, you could add more fat and more protein, or you could pretty much fill the rest of your calories in with just carbs. I'll use myself as an example. I know I said that you should be eating at least 0.7 grams per pound of protein and 0.3 grams per pound of fat. However, I tend to eat around 1 gram per pound of protein and around 0.5 to even 0.8 grams per pound of fat a day. And that's because I find I just feel better. It's the foods I like. I feel less bloated. And it kind of just works out for me because my athletic performance when I'm in the gym is still perfectly fine. However, you very well might find the opposite. You might find that when you push your fats up that high, your performance in the gym suffers, and then it might be worth it to start eating more carbs. Or if you eat that much protein, you get really bad digestive issues or something like that. That's why it really is an individual thing. And while we can certainly use guidelines and minimums like I recommend to help us, they are not the end-all be-all. Even these minimums aren't even the end-all be-all. Let's say you eat 0.6 grams per pound of protein a day instead of 0.7. Is all your muscle just going to fall off the bone? No. You're going to wake up and you're going to be just fine. Or let's say you eat 0.2 grams per pound of fat instead of 0.3 grams per pound. Again, if it's just a day or two, you're going to be just fine. As much as I would like to tell everyone about the optimal human diet, I really don't think that such a thing exists. And I would be very skeptical of anyone who claims that, especially with what we know about the human body at this current point in time. Maybe in the future, there really will be an optimal human diet as we learn more about stuff. But right now, for what it's worth, I'll tell you that if you are making progress towards your goal and you feel good, that's really all you need. Remember that there are many paths to success. There are people on literally every single range of the macronutrient spread. You have people eating only meat. You have people eating only fruit. You have people who only eat fruit and meat. There's literally people who eat everything. and yet we all exist, we all keep living. And sure, I can use principles to guide people and say, this is likely better than this. But at the end of the day, it is you who knows yourself best and you who has the most experience with previous eating. So to wrap all this up, I'll just summarize what I think and what I recommend other people do. Eat at least 0.7 grams per pound of protein per day. More is likely better for most people. Eat around 0.3 grams per pound of fat per day. Also, more is likely better to be on the safer side. However, more is only better to a certain extent. Don't up your fat intake like crazy because they are the highest in calories, which can take away from your other two macronutrients and perhaps give you worse results. If you eat below these recommended thresholds for a day or two, it's really no big deal. However, I really would not recommend staying below these thresholds for a significant period of time. Eat almost entirely clean foods that are filled with fiber and micronutrients and that don't mess with your digestion. Take note of your energy levels throughout the weeks and weeks, and take note of your performance. Take note of your hunger, and if you can, look at your blood work. Don't obsess over tiny details. Use these as a way to guide you, not force you into a certain diet. And remember to do what works for you. Have a good day, you guys.